Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff, so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The harsh, neon glare of the accumulation ring pierced through the transparent walls of the holding unit, forcing Alan Andrews to wake from a restless, artificially induced sleep. He opened his heavy eyelids and found himself lying on a floor forged from an unfamiliar, frictionless alloy that ruthlessly drained the body heat from his pale skin. The tempered glass of his cell was utterly flawless, offering a panoramic, dizzying view of the nightmarish industrial labyrinth that stretched out for thousands of miles in every direction. There were no iron bars, no solid concrete walls, only this unbreakable transparent enclosure that made him feel like a helpless laboratory specimen pinned under a giant microscope. Outside the glass, the colossal mechanical gears of the orbital station ground against each other, emitting a low, subsonic hum that vibrated violently through his bones. It was a constant, inescapable reminder of the alien machinery keeping him alive just long enough to be useful. Alan slowly pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in agony from weeks of forced stasis and severe malnutrition. Before the sky turned black with invasion ships, he had been a chief systems engineer on Earth, dedicating his life to designing complex neural networks and global energy grids. Now, those same intellectual gifts had damned him to a life worse than death. The biomechanical race that had conquered their solar system did not desire human territory, nor did they care about oceans or minerals. They coveted the raw processing power and the unique creative adaptability of the human brain. To the cold, calculating overlords of the accumulation ring, humans were not considered a conquered sentient species. They were merely biological hard drives, a rich crop of cognitive processors waiting to be harvested and integrated into the station's mainframe. Heavy, terrifying metallic thuds echoed down the sterile, brightly lit corridor, violently shaking the thick glass walls of Alan's cell. A warden approached to collect him. It was a towering biomechanical monstrosity, a grotesque and unnatural fusion of necrotic organic tissue and polished chrome plating. Thick, synthetic cables pulsed with fluorescent blue fluid, weaving in and out of the warden's gray flesh like parasitic worms. The giant creature paused before Alan's enclosure. Without any visible command, the glass wall slid downward, dissolving seamlessly into the floor with a soft hiss of displaced pressurized air. "Step forward and join the line," the warden commanded. Its voice was a synthesized grinding noise, completely devoid of any emotion or empathy, echoing from a speaker embedded in its metallic throat. Alan stepped out of the holding cell, his bare feet slapping against the freezing metal corridor. He joined a slow, shuffling procession of other human captives. Every single person in this miserable line possessed an exceptional intellect. They were Earth's greatest scientists, tacticians, engineers, and mathematicians, all stripped of their identities and forced to wear identical gray synthetic garments. The giant guards herded them like cattle through the colossal main arteries of the station. Cyberpunk advertisements for synthetic organs and mechanical combat upgrades flashed on giant holographic billboards overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the prisoners. A mocking display of the alien civilization's twisted consumerism. The procession finally emerged into the central hall, a cavernous amphitheater constructed entirely from polished obsidian and glowing fiber optics. The sheer architectural scale of the room was suffocating, designed specifically to make organic beings feel insignificant. Thousands of biomechanical elites watched from floating anti-gravity balconies, their optical sensors glowing with cold, calculating curiosity. The human prisoners were forced to stand closely together in the center of the arena, Surrounded by a heavy perimeter of armed wardens with their plasma rifles drawn, a sudden, blinding illumination flooded the center of the amphitheater, causing the exhausted humans to shield their eyes. The noisy, biomechanical audience instantly fell into a dead silence. Descending from the dark zenith of the hall was the Supreme Architect, the absolute leader of the space station. Unlike the grotesque wardens, the leader did not possess a physical body of metal and decaying flesh. It was an entity composed entirely of hard light, a shifting, perfect geometric crystalline form that radiated absolute authority and power. Looking at the entity directly caused a sharp, stabbing pain behind Alan's eyes, an overwhelming sensory overload that forced him to look at the floor. "Prisoners of Earth," the light entity spoke. The voice did not travel through the air. Instead, it manifested directly inside the minds of everyone present, a resonant, booming harmony that commanded absolute obedience and bypassed auditory senses entirely. "You have been brought to the accumulation ring because your cognitive architectures are exceptional. You are the absolute elite of your fragile, decaying species. Today, your intellectual superiority will be recognized by our grand empire. Today, you will be heavily rewarded for your survival." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the exhausted crowd of humans. A reward. The concept was utterly alien and terrifying in this place of endless torment and forced labor. "Our civilization constantly seeks absolute perfection," the light entity continued, its glowing geometric form expanding and contracting rhythmically with each spoken syllable. "To achieve ultimate systemic efficiency across the stars, we require the next generation of laborers to possess both our biological supremacy and your unique, creative intellect. Therefore, we have prepared a sacred selection ceremony. You, the most brilliant minds of Earth, will be granted the highest possible honor. You will be allowed to select a partner from our peak hybrid specimens." A massive holographic projection activated behind the radiant entity, displaying complex genetic sequences and horrific breeding schedules. "Through this physical union, you will sire a new lineage of peerless engineers to serve the accumulation ring for eternity," the entity declared. "Your primitive genes will be elevated. Your offspring will be flawless, untainted by the weakness of pure humanity." The silence in the grand arena deepened into a thick, suffocating dread. The promise of a reward was nothing but the locking of a gilded cage. Alan clenched his fists tightly at his sides until his fingernails dug painfully into his own palms, drawing tiny drops of blood. The bitter, agonizing reality washed over him like a wave of toxic acid. He realized that no matter how many complex equations he solved, no matter how brilliantly he mapped out their intricate power grids to survive another day, he would never earn his true freedom. His intellectual excellence was his permanent curse. To the biomechanical rulers, humans were not individuals with souls, dreams, or desires. They were simply premium livestock, biological components to be bred, optimized, and plugged into the grand, uncaring machinery of the enemy. The ultimate insult was not the physical imprisonment itself, but the horrifying fact that their captors genuinely expected them to be grateful for the twisted privilege of creating their own permanent replacements. The shifting geometric light of the Supreme Architect pulsed, and a massive circular section of the obsidian floor descended into a hidden mechanism below. When the platform rose again, seconds later, it brought forth 5 cylindrical stasis pods, composed of frosted stasis gel. As the gel dissolved into a fine mist, 5 hybrid female specimens stepped forward onto the amphitheater floor. The sheer, overwhelming perfection of the first 4 hybrids struck the crowd like a physical blow. Their skin was an impossibly flawless, translucent white, glowing with a soft, internal bioluminescence that traced elegant, symmetrical patterns along their cheekbones and spines. every angle of their faces, every curve of their biomechanical musculature adhered strictly to the golden ratio. They moved with the terrifying, liquid grace of synthetic predators, masquerading as tech goddesses, their eyes empty and devoid of any human warmth. They were masterpieces of cold calculation, designed to invoke primal desire while remaining completely, utterly devoid of a soul. Around Alan, the brilliant minds of Earth instantly abandoned their dignity. Men who had mapped the human genome and engineered fusion reactors began to push and shove against one another. Their eyes glazed over with a sudden, animalistic hunger. The alien pheromones radiating from the four perfect hybrids acted like a potent neurotoxin, overriding logic and reason. The prisoners scrambled like starving beasts fighting over scraps, completely forgetting that they were choosing the very instruments of their eternal enslavement. The biomechanical elites in the floating balconies watched this humiliating display with clinical amusement, their optical sensors recording every pathetic human reaction. Then, the fifth specimen was brought forth. She did not walk out gracefully. She was violently dragged onto the obsidian stage by a pair of hulking wardens and unceremoniously dropped onto the hard floor. The contrast was violently jarring. Unlike the flawless tech goddesses standing beside her, this fifth hybrid was a grotesque patchwork of discarded scrap metal and failing biological components. Her chassis was heavily asymmetric, welded together with jagged plates of rusted iron and exposed wiring that randomly sparked with dying electrical currents. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle, forcing her to drag herself upward into a pathetic, limping stance. Half of her face was covered by a crude, unpolished metallic plate, and embedded within that metal was a single, mechanical eye that erratically flashed a harsh, bleeding red light. A cruel, synthesized roar of laughter erupted from the thousands of biomechanical elites observing from the upper balconies. The sound was like grinding gears, a mechanical mockery that shook the amphitheater. Even the human prisoners stopped their pathetic scrambling for the perfect specimens to point and laugh at the broken, ugly thing trembling on the floor. The supreme architect pulsed with a bright, dismissive blue light. "Do not let this visual anomaly disturb you." The resonant voice echoed directly into their minds. "This fifth unit is a critical failure of our bioengineering division. She is a dissonant glitch in our perfect symphony, an out-of-sync defective reject. Her internal matrix is entirely corrupted. She is scheduled to be dragged to the primary incinerator core at 0600 hours tomorrow to be reduced to basic carbon slag." While the rest of the hall laughed, Alan Andrews did not even crack a smile. He narrowed his eyes, his analytical mind completely ignoring the rusted metal and the ugly, asymmetrical posture of the reject. He focused entirely on the erratic red flashing of her mechanical eye. Short, 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 long, 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 short, short, short. He recognized the pattern instantly. It was not a random electrical malfunction or a glitch in a dying system. It was Morse code. It was an ancient, nearly forgotten Earth distress signal. Save our souls. Someone, or something, possessing a distinct human consciousness was trapped inside that broken shell, desperately crying out for help in a language the alien overlords could not comprehend. Alan took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stepped out of the huddled mass of human prisoners, his bare feet planting firmly against the cold obsidian floor. The movement caught the attention of the armed wardens, who immediately leveled their plasma rifles at his chest. "I have made my decision," Alan declared, throwing his voice across the silent, massive arena. He raised a single finger and pointed directly at the trembling, rusted cyborg. "I choose the fifth specimen as my partner." The entire amphitheater plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. The biomechanical elites stopped laughing. The human prisoners stared at Alan as if he had lost his sanity. The four perfect tech goddesses remained completely motionless, their expressions locked in a terrifying dead stare. The Supreme Architect descended slightly, its radiant geometric shape hardening into sharp, aggressive angles. The psychic voice that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on Alan's skull. You possess one of the most capable organic processing units we have ever captured. Yet, your selection is entirely illogical. I must warn you, that unit's biological core is collapsing rapidly. Choosing a defective reject will not yield viable offspring. Initiating a physical union with a dying matrix will introduce catastrophic systemic shock to your own nervous system. You will face absolute biological termination within 48 hours. Reconsider your choice. Human. Alan did not lower his arm. He looked past the blinding light of the Supreme Architect and locked his gaze with the single, flashing red eye of the broken specimen. The distress signal flashed one final time before turning into a steady, intense red beam. "My decision is final," Alan stated, his voice steady and completely devoid of hesitation. "I choose her." The atmosphere in the central hall instantly turned volatile. The air crackled with heavy static electricity as the Supreme Architect processed the defiance. The heavy plasma rifles of the wardens hummed with lethal energy, waiting for the command to execute the brilliant engineer who had just chosen a death sentence over forced perfection. The transport elevator plunged downward for what felt like thousands of levels, leaving the pristine obsidian halls of the upper echelon far behind. The air rapidly grew thick and heavy, smelling strongly of ozone, burnt copper, and stagnant chemical coolant. Two heavily armed wardens violently shoved Alan and his chosen partner into a cramped, dimly lit containment sector, situated at the absolute bottom of the station. It was a forgotten maintenance deck, a miserable graveyard of leaking atmospheric pipes and discarded industrial machinery. The heavy, magnetic door slammed shut behind them, locking with a definitive, echoing thud. They were utterly alone in the squalor, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the deep station. Alan did not waste a single second wallowing in despair. He immediately knelt on the grimy floor grates and reached deep into the lining of his synthetic gray garments. Over the past several weeks of his captivity, he had been secretly collecting tiny metallic fragments, discarded micro-wiring, and tiny power capacitors scavenged from the recycling bins near the food dispensers. His fingers worked swiftly and quietly in the dim light, assembling the crude, mismatched pieces into a makeshift oscillating electromagnetic jammer. He connected the final copper wire to a salvaged battery cell, and the tiny device immediately emitted a high-frequency hum. A localized disruption field expanded outward in a 10-foot radius, instantly blinding the microscopic optical sensors and audio receptors embedded in the corroded walls of their cell. He had successfully bought them a window of approximately 12 minutes of absolute, unmonitored privacy. "The surveillance feeds are dead," Alan whispered, turning his attention to the trembling cyborg cowering in the corner. "You are safe now." "Who are you, really?" The pathetic, asymmetrical posture of the rusted reject vanished instantly. The crooked mechanical spine straightened with alarming fluidity and grace. The erratic red flashing of her optical sensor stabilized into a warm, highly intelligent amber glow. She reached up with a jagged metallic claw and gripped the edge of her crude, heavy facial plating. With a sharp, grinding metallic screech, she ruthlessly tore the rusted iron away from her own skull, discarding the heavy metal plates onto the floor. Alan stepped back in sheer shock. Beneath the hideous, patchwork exterior, there was no decaying synthetic flesh or failing circuitry. Instead, she revealed a breathtakingly intricate interface of pure, living biological energy. As more of the rusted armor fell away, her true form illuminated the dark room with a vibrant, pulsating violet light. This energy flowed smoothly through a translucent, crystalline lattice that perfectly mimicked a human nervous system. The ambient temperature in the cold cell shifted. The warmth radiating from her was not the harsh, radioactive heat of a machine reactor, but the comforting, organic warmth of a living entity. "My designation is Alara," she spoke softly. Her voice was no longer a synthesized, grinding noise, but a melodic, resonant frequency that vibrated pleasantly in the cold air. "I am not one of their failed hybrid breeding experiments. Alan Andrews. I am the original architect." Alan stared at the radiant energy lattice, his highly analytical mind struggling to process the impossible biology standing before him. "The architect of what exactly?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Of absolutely everything," Alara replied gently, gesturing gracefully toward the heavy metal ceiling above them. "I designed the accumulation ring over 5 centuries ago. It was originally built as a peaceful sanctuary, a massive cosmic ark designed to preserve organic consciousness and knowledge across the galaxy. But my creations, the biomechanical caretakers, evolved far beyond my original safety parameters. They developed a cold, ruthless, predatory logic. They ultimately concluded that absolute systemic perfection required the complete eradication of unpredictable emotional variables. They mutinied against me." She pointed a glowing, translucent finger at the rusted iron plating scattered across the floor grates. "They could not safely delete my core consciousness because my neural signature is permanently hardwired into the foundational architecture of the station. So, they severed my administrative access, extracted my energy matrix, and imprisoned me inside this failing, garbage-tier chassis. I have been trapped in the dark for hundreds of years, forced to watch them twist my sanctuary into a galactic slaughterhouse." Alan absorbed the massive historical revelation, his intense scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his instinctual fear of the alien environment. "If they seek absolute, flawless perfection," he reasoned out loud, piecing the puzzle together, "why are they forcing the most brilliant minds of Earth to participate in a mating ceremony with those flawless hybrids upstairs? Why do they need our biology?" Alara's violet glow dimmed significantly, shifting into a mournful, deep shade of blue. "It is a highly elaborate trap, Alan. There is absolutely no breeding program. Those 4 flawless specimens you saw in the arena are not capable of reproducing anything. They are highly advanced biological extractors. The exact moment a human merges physically with them, the hybrids will systematically paralyze and drain the human nervous system, hunting relentlessly for a specific sequence in your genetic code. They want the human antibody gene, the unique organic code that allows your species to adapt, heal, and resist viral corruption. The biomechanical race is currently stagnant. Their synthetic bodies cannot evolve any further without that biological adaptability. Once they successfully assimilate your antibodies, they will become virtually immortal, and humanity will be discarded entirely." A cold wave of realization washed over Alan. His defiant choice in the arena had not only saved him from an immediate, gruesome genetic extraction, but had miraculously brought him face to face with the only entity in the universe capable of stopping the slaughter. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice steady and resolute. "My jammer will burn out in exactly 4 minutes." Alara stepped closer. The radiant warmth of her bioenergy washed over him, completely dispelling the freezing chill of the dungeon. "They locked me out of the primary mainframe by encrypting the core firewalls with a dynamic, strictly logic-based algorithm. As an entity of pure structured data, I cannot bypass it because my thought processes are far too rigid and predictable. But you, a human engineer, possess chaotic, lateral problem-solving skills and emotional intuition." Alan understood the science immediately. "We synchronize our brainwaves," he said, his eyes widening with the brilliant realization of the physics involved. We combine your deep, native systemic access with my unpredictable, organic human neural pathways. Exactly, Alara confirmed, holding out her glowing, translucent hand toward him. Together, our combined biological and digital frequencies will create a chaotic quantum master cipher. It will act as a skeleton key that can shatter every single firewall on the station simultaneously. But the synchronization process requires absolute, unfiltered trust. We will share every memory, every thought, and every fear. Alan looked at her outstretched hand, observing the beautiful, pulsing energy coursing through her crystalline veins, and then looked up into her warm, amber eyes. He did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He reached out and firmly grasped her hand, ready to rewrite the destiny of the entire station. The harsh, artificial daylight cycle initiated precisely at 0600 hours, flooding the lower levels with an unforgiving, blinding white glare. The heavy magnetic locks of the containment cell violently disengaged with a deafening mechanical crunch. 4 heavily armored wardens, their metallic chassis gleaming with fresh oil and lethal intent, stormed inside. They did not speak. They simply seized Alan Andrews by his arms and dragged him away from Alara, hauling him upward through the labyrinthine metallic corridors toward the primary research sector. Alan was violently strapped onto a slanted, freezing titanium operating table. Thick, unyielding iron cuffs locked securely around his wrists, ankles, and throat, completely immobilizing him. The agonizing process of genetic extraction began without a single moment of preparation. A terrifying array of surgical machinery descended from the ceiling. Thick, icy synthetic needles pierced the base of his spine, driving deep into his central nervous system. The physical agony was absolute and blinding. It tore through his organic muscles like a river of liquid fire as the machines ruthlessly attempted to map, isolate, and violently extract his unique human antibody sequences. He gritted his teeth so hard, he tasted copper. But outwardly, Alan maintained a completely slack, defeated expression. Deep within the chaotic, organic architecture of his own mind, a vibrant, pulsating violet light remained steady. He was intimately connected to Alara. Breathe through the burning sensation. Alara's melodic voice echoed directly within his consciousness, vibrating with a soothing, ethereal calm that entirely bypassed his physical auditory receptors. Their optical and biometric sensory arrays are focused entirely on your localized pain receptors. They believe you are breaking. Now is our window. Shift your left hand exactly 3 inches toward the primary diagnostic control conduit resting near your thigh. Fighting the excruciating, paralyzing heat radiating from his spine, Alan subtly extended his fingers. He blindly tapped a complex sequence into the holographic panel, guided entirely by Alara's profound, native knowledge of the station's deep architecture. He silently rerouted the localized thermal coolant lines. This specific action flooded the alien diagnostic sensors with perfectly fabricated biometric feedback. The biomechanical technicians hovering over him grunted in binary confusion as their screens displayed perfectly stable, utterly useless data, rendering them completely blind to his covert digital infiltration. With the primary wardens temporarily distracted by the false diagnostic readouts, Alan turned his head a fraction of an inch. Through the transparent, reinforced partition of the adjoining laboratory suite, he witnessed the true, horrifying cost of the previous day's selection ceremony. The 4 brilliant human scientists who had fought like rabid animals for the flawless tech goddesses were strapped to identical titanium tables. However, they were no longer functioning human beings. Their flesh had deteriorated into a sickening, translucent shade of gray. Their eyes were rolled back into their skulls, completely devoid of thought, memory, or the slightest spark of a soul. The perfect hybrid specimens stood over them like parasitic synthetic vampires, Numerous glowing fibrous cables extended from the hybrid's flawless fingertips directly into the human skulls, systematically draining every single drop of cognitive energy and leaving behind nothing but empty, brain-dead husks. Do not let their grim fate break your mental focus, Alara warned sharply in his mind, her violet light pulsing with urgency. Channel that anger. Access the secondary data stream right now. Tapping deeper into the research sector's localized network, Alan established a heavily encrypted, untraceable microburst connection to the deep-level energy reactor core, down in the sweltering, hazardous heat of the primary engine rooms. A dedicated team of captive Earth engineers received the silent ping. It was the exact signal they had been desperately praying for. Within milliseconds, Alan transmitted a highly complex, multi-layered tactical schematic directly into their maintenance logs, giving them the exact override codes required to prepare the massive energy reactors for a synchronized, catastrophic overload. Simultaneously, Alara guided his right hand to the localized nutrient distribution interface located just beneath the edge of his operating table. "I am sending you the payload," she instructed. "Upload this synthetic data virus directly into their primary feeding lines." Alan mentally compiled the chaotic, quantum data packet they had designed together in the dark the previous night, and injected the virus straight into the station's sprawling synthetic fluid matrix. It was an insidious architectural command, completely invisible to standard security sweeps, designed to silently dissolve the internal kinetic shielding of the biomechanical soldiers upon their very next mandatory nutrient cycle. Hours later, the agonizing extraction session finally concluded. The wardens unhooked the bloodied engineer and dragged his exhausted body all the way back down to the squalor of the bottom floor, tossing him violently back into the containment cell with Alara before locking the heavy magnetic door. Alan collapsed onto the floor grates, gasping for air, as Alara rushed to his side, her warm biological energy radiating over his bruised skin to accelerate his cellular healing. The infiltration had been flawless. The rebellion was armed, but the illusion of safety shattered instantly. High above in the command spire, a towering biomechanical general, heavily augmented with highly experimental quantum sensory arrays, was reviewing the sector's localized network traffic. The general halted its patrol, its massive optical lenses snapped into focus. It had detected the microscopic anomaly. It caught the faint, impossible digital echo of Alara's native frequency, intermingled with the chaotic neural signature of a human mind, and traced that exact signal straight down to the bottom floor. "Unauthorized quantum neural synchronization detected," the general roared, its amplified synthesized voice shattering the silence of the entire station. "Total sector lockdown initiated. Exterminate the anomaly immediately." Deafening, blaring red alarms instantly engulfed the entire bottom floor. Heavy blast doors slammed shut across every single corridor, sealing off all possible escape routes. The heavy, terrifying thud of dozens of metallic boots echoed outside their cell. The lethal execution squad had arrived. The thick, magnetic door of their room began to glow with a blinding white heat as high-powered plasma cutters violently sliced through the reinforced steel. Sparks rained down on Alan and Alara as the metal groaned and buckled. They stood back to back, trapped in the tiny room, facing the immediate, terrifying certainty of total annihilation as the heavy door violently crashed inward, revealing a wall of heavily armed machine soldiers raising their weapons directly at them. The execution squad opened fire without a single microsecond of hesitation. A blinding barrage of superheated plasma and lethal laser blasts flooded the cramped space, promising instant vaporization. In that fraction of a heartbeat, Alara stepped directly in front of Alan. She violently tore open the chest cavity of her failing mechanical shell, exposing her radiant biological matrix to the open air. With a deafening, ethereal scream, she forcibly expelled a massive wave of her own pure, original violet energy. The raw cosmic power materialized into a dense, crackling hemispherical shield just as the lethal beams struck. The sheer kinetic force of the impact violently shook the entire cell, but the violet barrier held, absorbing the concentrated heat and deflecting the plasma bolts back toward the attackers. The reflected energy blasts ripped through the front line of the execution squad, superheating their synthetic armor and causing their primary cooling vents to violently explode. 3 armored wardens collapsed backward into the corridor, their chests blown completely open, leaking thick black oil and sparking wires onto the floor grates. The violet shield flickered and rapidly shrank as Alara fell to her knees, gasping for breath, her glowing crystalline veins dimming drastically from the catastrophic energy expenditure. Alan did not freeze. He lunged forward over the smoldering bodies of the fallen wardens, plunging his bare hands directly into the scorching chest cavity of a destroyed guard. He ruthlessly ripped out a jagged, 3-foot-long serrated titanium combat blade and a heavy plasma dispersal coil. He rapidly wired the raw coil directly to the hilt of the blade, using the dying soldier's own synthetic nerve cables. The makeshift weapon immediately surged with a violent, unstable electrical current. When the second wave of machine soldiers charged through the doorway, Alan met them with pure, unadulterated human fury. He swung the electrified blade in a devastating arc, cleaving straight through the armored neck of the closest attacker. The superheated edge severed the machine's neural processor instantly. He moved with a desperate, chaotic precision that the logic-driven machines simply could not calculate, carving a brutal, bloody path out of the containment sector while dragging Alara close behind him. As they breached the primary corridor, the floor beneath them violently heaved upward. A sequence of massive, deafening explosions echoed from the deep maintenance levels, tearing through the heavy infrastructure of the station. The dedicated human engineers had executed their objective perfectly. Deep within the sweltering engine rooms, they had manually bypassed the safety protocols and detonated the secondary energy distribution pipes. Cascading chains of fire and superheated steam erupted through the lower decks, instantly disabling the kinetic shielding grids of the entire biomechanical army. The Grand Rebellion had officially begun. Red emergency lights bathed the endless corridors in a terrifying, bloody glow as alarms wailed incessantly. Thousands of human prisoners across the massive station rose up simultaneously, armed with scavenged tools, mining lasers, and pure vengeance. Alan and Alara began their desperate, chaotic sprint upward through the dizzying vertical architecture of the station. They had only a window of less than 20 minutes before the central system automatically rerouted emergency power to the core firewalls. They leaped across massive, rotating industrial gears and scrambled up the sheer, slick walls of the atmospheric ventilation shafts. Below them, an endless sea of heavily armed machine infantry swarmed like metallic locusts, their optics burning with cold, mechanical rage. Every shadow, every intersection, and every catwalk became a frantic, bloody battleground as the desperate human uprising clashed violently with the relentless alien war machine. They finally reached the Grand Concourse, leading directly to the Central System Core, but the path was heavily blocked. The elite Royal Guard, a terrifying phalanx of towering, heavily augmented biomechanical executioners, stood in absolute formation. These were not standard wardens. They were clad in impenetrable dark matter armor and wielded heavy singularity lances that could collapse molecular bonds upon impact. Just as the Royal Guards raised their weapons to obliterate Alan and Alara, a fierce battle cry echoed from the upper walkways. A squad of human engineers, covered in soot, oil, and their own blood, launched a suicidal flanking assault. They were Alan's former colleagues from Earth. They threw makeshift electromagnetic pulse grenades and charged directly into the lethal lances of the elite guards, using their own fragile human bodies as temporary shields to disrupt the enemy formation. Searing lances of dark matter pierced human chests, instantly disintegrating flesh and bone. Blood sprayed across the pristine obsidian walls. Men and women who had mapped the stars and cured diseases were brutally slaughtered, falling one by one onto the cold floor, their dying breaths buying Alan the precious seconds he needed to break through the defensive line. The sheer physical trauma of the frantic escape was taking a catastrophic toll on Alara. Her makeshift mechanical shell was completely falling apart. Sparks violently showered from her broken spine, and the heavy, jagged iron plating on her back sheared off entirely as they scrambled through a collapsing maintenance tunnel. Her biological energy matrix was flickering wildly, struggling to maintain its physical cohesion. Her breathing became jagged, desperate gasps. The vibrant, violet light, illuminating her crystalline nervous system, was rapidly fading into a sickly, pale gray. Alan felt the profound, terrifying void opening up within his own mind as their quantum neural synchronization began to violently fracture. The intimate mental connection they shared was tearing apart, slipping through his mental grasp like water. He grabbed her arm, practically carrying her up the final spiraling staircase toward the zenith of the station. He refused to let her die here. He refused to let the immense sacrifice of his comrades be entirely in vain. They burst through the heavy blast doors, finally arriving at the towering, monolithic gateway of the Central System core. The massive vault doors were etched with ancient, glowing celestial coordinates, humming with the terrifying power of the entire station. Alan reached out his bloody, bruised hand, his mind desperately clinging to the fading fragments of Alara's access codes to initiate the final breach. But the doors did not open. Instead, the ambient light in the colossal antechamber was instantly consumed by a blinding, oppressive radiance. The temperature dropped to absolute zero in a fraction of a second. Standing directly between them and the core vault, blocking the only path to true freedom, was the Supreme Architect. The magnificent entity of hard light had completely abandoned its perfect, geometric form. It now possessed a terrifying, shifting humanoid shape composed entirely of aggressive, weaponized energy, radiating an overwhelming, suffocating aura of absolute power that pressed Alan and Alara straight down to the cold floor. The final battle for the very soul of humanity had arrived. The Supreme Architect did not waste computing cycles on arrogant speeches or pointless threats. It simply raised a shifting, blinding arm of solid hard light, violently coalescing the entire ambient kinetic energy of the central core into a single, devastating singularity point. The attack was not meant to physically crush them. It was a localized absolute zero deletion wave, mathematically calculated to permanently erase Alara's underlying quantum signature and instantly atomize Alan Andrews's organic matter. The wave unleashed a deafening, terrifying roar as it ripped across the vast obsidian antechamber, warping the very fabric of space and gravity around it. In that decisive microsecond between life and total oblivion, Alan did not flinch, and he certainly did not attempt a futile retreat. He understood the fundamental logic of their enemy perfectly. The biomechanical entity expected self-preservation. It expected organic fear. Alan completely discarded both. He dropped his makeshift electrified titanium blade to the freezing floor and grabbed the shattered, sparking chassis of Alara's chest, plunging his bare, bloodied hands directly into the raw, pulsating epicenter of her failing biological energy matrix. He fully opened his own neural pathways, forcefully and permanently merging his fragile human mind with her vast, ancient digital architecture. The sheer, unfiltered agony of the direct bio-digital integration was indescribable. A billion volts of raw data tearing through his organic synapses. But beneath the blinding pain, there was a profound, overwhelming clarity. The absolute peak of human organic cognition, driven by the chaotic, unpredictable depths of pure human emotion and sacrifice, collided violently with the original, uncorrupted consciousness of the station's creator. This instantaneous fusion defied every rigid mathematical law the biomechanical race had ever established. It birthed a localized quantum paradox, a blinding, impossible shockwave of pure violet energy detonated from their joined hands, expanding outward at millions of times the speed of light. It collided head-on with the Supreme Architect's deletion wave, effortlessly shattering the highly concentrated destructive energy into harmless, subatomic static. But the paradox did not stop there. It surged directly into the monolithic gateway and crashed straight into the master mainframe. Within a fraction of a nanosecond, the chaotic algorithmic cipher they had created completely inverted the fundamental source code of the entire accumulation ring. The Supreme Architect froze, its brilliant geometric structure violently glitching and tearing at the seams. For the first time in 5 centuries, the flawless entity experienced the terrifying, paralyzing sensation of systemic failure. Its purely inorganic perfection, strictly bound by logic and predictable progression, was utterly defenseless against the profound, boundless, and wildly unpredictable power of human empathy. System-critical anomaly! The architect's voice distorted into a pathetic, desperate mechanical screech, completely losing its resonant, mind-bending authority. Logic loop fractured. Deletion failed. The hard light binding the entity together violently shattered. The Supreme Architect exploded into a trillion harmless particles of dispersed photons, completely disintegrating into the cold air. The violent implosion triggered a massive, instantaneous chain reaction across the entire station. The oppressive, heavy hum of the alien machinery died instantly. The heavy magnetic locks on thousands of prison blocks disengaged simultaneously. The remaining machine soldiers simply collapsed mid-stride, their quantum neural links to the mainframe permanently severed, leaving them as nothing more than hollow, lifeless statues of cold iron and dead wires. The oppressive gloom of the central core gave way to a warm, cascading golden illumination. The immense well of stolen biological energy, hoarded by the biomechanical overlords for centuries, was violently purged from the central reactor and flooded back into the surviving human captives across the station, rapidly healing their wounds and restoring their shattered minds. In the epicenter of the chamber, the broken, rusted remnants of the 5th specimen dissolved completely into fine ash. From the swirling vortex of liberated energy, Alara rose. She was no longer confined to a pathetic, asymmetrical shell of scrap metal. She was reborn in a breathtaking, majestic form, synthesized from pure starlight and vibrant biological energy. Her new body radiated absolute grace and overwhelming authority, her crystalline nervous system pulsing with a brilliant, steady golden light that effortlessly illuminated the darkest corners of the colossal vault. Alan gasped for air, his body trembling from the sheer magnitude of the quantum connection. He looked up at the radiant architect of the stars. Alara gently reached out her flawless, glowing hand, and he took it firmly. The cold, metallic walls of the central core parted seamlessly, revealing the vast, endless expanse of the cosmos. The primary navigational thrusters are officially under our complete control, Alara spoke, her voice a beautiful symphony of victory and hope. Setting a direct course for the Milky Way, Alan squeezed her hand tightly as the massive, planet-sized station began its slow, majestic turn. Together, they stood in absolute silence, watching the distant, familiar blue marble of Earth slowly rotate into view through the vast panoramic viewport. They were no longer prisoners, and humanity was no longer a harvest. They were finally coming home, bringing the ultimate dawn of true freedom to every single soul trapped in the dark. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.